This is WEBN News, and I'm Kate Spalla. Today in the studio, we have Republican presidential candidate Buddy Roemer. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks, Kate. Good to be here.
Great. Let's get started. Now let's get to know Buddy Roemer. How would you describe yourself?
Oh, my God. I'm a grandfather. I'm 68. I have 3 kids, 3 grandkids, so that's the most important thing in my life. So I wanted to say that. I'm from Louisiana. I'm unique in this contest in that I'm the only candidate running for president in either party who's been both a congressman and a governor. I added to that the fact that I've been a very successful businessman the last 15 years that I've been out of office. In fact, I have a bank that I've built in Louisiana and Texas. It's called Business First Bank. It's almost $1 billion. No bailout money. I don't believe in it. And we're profitable and very successful. So I'm a combination of a practiced politician and then the last 20 years a practicing business person. I think that's a good combination for Washington.
Let's talk about the Occupy movements. Occupy Boston was shut down last week. It seems like you have a lot of interest. What are your thoughts?
My heart wasn't right. Now let's just be plain about it. America's real nervous when somebody stands up on Wall Street or Boston or Washington, D.C. and tells the truth. The truth is that we have become a nation run by the elites, either in their checkbook or in their special interest. So let me say to Newt Gingrich, who's on top of the Republican Party right now, Newt, you have a lot to learn from young people. Newt, you ought to listen more. I know he likes to preach and teach. That's fine. But there's a time to listen. And right now, the economy of this country is so bad that we need to listen to people who say, I smell something. Well, what do you smell, sir? I smell corruption in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street.
The election is just less than a year away. You seem to have a lot of ideas, but the country hasn't seen much of Buddy Roemer yet. Why not, and what's going to change in 2012?
Well, you've heard my ideas. You can see why. I mean, no Republican believes like I do that Washington, D.C. is corrupt. I can tell they don't believe it because they take the money from them. They take lobbyist money. They take PAC money. They take super PAC money. I mean, John Huntsman has a super PAC that his dad finances and gives him all of his money in New Hampshire. No problem, except one thing. It's against the law. Super PACs are supposed to be separate from the candidate. Huntsman could do it legally. He would take the money from his father and spend it like he wants to, but he'd have to pay taxes on it. Oh my God, don't pay taxes. Let's break the law. Look at Newt Gingrich just got a super PAC. Mitt Romney's the worst. He's got 3. Maybe he's not the worst. Maybe Rick Perry is. He has 7. Michelle Bachmann has 1. Ron Paul, my favorite candidate other than me, has 1 even. Enough already. Why don't we have clean elections? Why don't we get a president free to lead? Why don't we get somebody to stand up for that? People say, well, you can't win, Buddy, with only $100. I can. If I get 1 million people, I always thought that I would get on the debate stage as being the only congressman and governor running and raise hell about business as usual. Ask my Republicans to join me in a pledge not to take special interest money. Appeal to the American people to rebuild a nation. You can tell I'm excited about it. This is what I do. I have not been invited to a single debate, and you ask why. There have been 15 of them. I'm 0 for 15. You ask why? They changed the rules at every debate to keep me out. The first was you had to be a formal candidate. So I announced in July and August at Dartmouth in New Hampshire. I became a formal candidate. So I went to them, they said, oh, you have to have 1%. Well, not being on a debate, it's hard to get 1%, but I got 1%. I went to them again, they said, oh, you had to have 2%. So I got 2%. I went to them again 3 debates ago, and they said, oh, you had to raise $500,000 plus get 2%. I said, $500,000? Is that how you run for president? They measure how much money you have? There's something wrong about this. They keep changing the rules to keep me out. And I know why. I'll ask Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich how they are the 1%er. That's Mitt Romney, $10,000 bet the other night. Is that embarrassing?
What do you think about
Newt,
the $10,000?
I'll tell you. And Newt Gingrich is the lobbyist for the 1%. That's how he makes his living. You know who paid him $1.8 million? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They should be disbarred. I thought the 10% was an embarrassment. You know, it was a faux pas, a slip of the tongue.
The bet, the
The
$10,000
bet, the $10,000 bet. But it exposed Mitt Romney for who he is. A nice guy, a decent guy, but he's not in touch with America. A $10,000 bet where I'm from is a bad idea. It's more money than people make in my state working 3 months full time. It's a joke. It's an embarrassment. It's a sad moment. And to have him and Newt talk about it, or him and Rick Perry talk about it, I think they ought to be given a yellow slip on the next debate. That's what I would do. Have them both get off the debate, and let's have some fresh blood in. And let's see how this Louisiana boy does with his 2 little Harvard degrees and his success in banking and his experience as congressman and governor. I'm not the world's greatest debater, but compared to those two, I'll take my chances with Newt.
Hello, and thank you for watching WEBN. I'm Sarah Ebal-Weiss, and today we have a special guest with us. Alan Khazei is here. He is a Democratic candidate running for U.S. Senate in Massachusetts. So thank you, Mr. Khazei, for being here today. We really do appreciate it.
It's great to be with you, Sarah.
All right, so we're going to just jump right in
Sure.
and get to know you. So basically, if I said Alan Khazei to you, how would you describe him?
I'd say idealist, social entrepreneur, dad, someone who cares about the community, and has spent his whole life working from the grassroots up.
Bob Macy and Mayor Seti Warren have both already dropped out of the race. Are you going to finish out this entire race?
Yes, yes. It's too bad that, I mean, they're both great candidates. I got to know them well. They're good friends. I think it's important to have a debate in the Democratic primary. I think there are a lot of issues at stake. What is your plan for jobs? What's your experience in creating jobs? What is your plan for public education to make sure that every single student has a high quality public education and access to the American dream? What are we going to do about poverty? We have 46 million of our fellow citizens living in poverty now. 2 out of 5 families in just the past 2 years have fallen below the poverty line. What's your agenda for that? How do we deal with that? And the other issue I'm emphasizing is how do we instill a new citizen-led democracy through a new call to service and campaign finance reform? So there are a lot of issues at stake. The country is at a real turning point, and I think it's healthy to have a debate in the Democratic primary.
In Congress in general, there's been a huge lack of compromise. How would you help promote compromise in Congress?
Well, the way I've done it as a citizen, by mobilizing people from the grassroots up. We need to break the dysfunction in Washington. It's dominated by special interests, by PACs, by lobbyists, by people who are trying to buy their way, and they're being too successful. So what I've done, and I've done this in the service movement, is to mobilize people from the grassroots up, build coalitions of people, often unlikely allies, to say, here's what's good for the country. Let's put the country first. Let's promote the common good. And when you do that, you can actually move Congress. 8 years ago, Tom DeLay and a group of far-right Republicans tried to kill the AmeriCorps program. There was an 80% funding cut overnight. I organized the Save AmeriCorps Coalition that built a movement across the country, and we not only saved the program, we got a 50% increase because so many citizens raised their voices. So this is doable if you understand how to do it. I've spent my life doing that. It's a little different vision for what a United States Senator can do, but I'm confident it's the key strategy to actually get Congress to move.
How much does the late Senator Ted Kennedy's legacy play into this race?
Oh, well, I was blessed to work closely with Senator Kennedy for 20 years, helping to build the service movement from nothing into now, with the Kennedy Serve America Act, will be 250,000 people every year if the Congress funds it, which I hope they do. And I'm pushing to make sure that gets funded, and if I'm elected, it will get funded. He was an incredible mentor for me. What I loved about Senator Kennedy was he had a core set of principles and values that guided him as a compass. He titled his book True Compass, and that was his compass, and he always stayed true to that. But at the same time, he understood that the Senate was about building bridges and reaching across the aisle to get things done. He passed over 500 pieces of legislation. He always found a Republican partner and would build a bipartisan coalition behind the efforts that he did. So he's a role model for me. He's one of the great senators of all time, and I think that he remains an inspiration to all of us who aspire to the highest ideals in public service.
Well, you said it here. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Khazei. We really
Thank you,
appreciate
Sarah.
to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of WEBN. I'm Sarah Ewald-Weiss, and today I have a very special guest here on the show with us. State Representative Tom Conroy is here. Thank you so much for coming, Mr. Representative. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Sarah.
All right, so here today we're discussing your campaign for U.S. Senate in Massachusetts.
Yes.
So just let's get to know you a little bit before we get into that. If I say Tom Conroy, what are 4 things that come to mind?
Well, state representative from Wayland. I've been up at the State House for 3 terms now, 5 years. Businessman with a conscience. I've worked in the private sector for 16 years. Father of triplet daughters who are 15. A lot of people sort of get a kick out of that. And a guy who walked this summer over 650 miles throughout the Commonwealth, visiting over 125 cities and towns.
So when you walked across the state, you saw a lot, obviously.
Yes.
What were some of the big issues you saw that people needed help with here in Mass?
Jobs, jobs, jobs. That is the refrain I heard again and again. There's a lot, and once you get outside of 495, there's a lot of people out there who have been laid off, and I've got stories of dozens of them in which they'd been working 25, 30 years at a good, steady middle-class job with decent wages and decent benefits, but when I saw them this summer, they had been out of work for 2, sometimes 3 years. So that's a huge issue. I think transportation issues are enormous. I saw our crumbling infrastructure, our roads and our railways, buildings and bridges collapsing sort of all over the place and at risk of really holding back our economic productivity and our not really creating an environment that's conducive to business growth and job growth. So those were 2 things, jobs and infrastructure, that were really, really noticeable. And of course, heard other stories about healthcare access and healthcare costs, improving our school systems, protecting the environment, some of the more standard issues that you would expect you'd hear from voters all across the state.
Okay, there's a lot of dissatisfaction across the country, and it's even spread across the world here with the Occupy movement.
Yes.
What issues do you think you can address for them? What would you say to those people?
Well, I certainly empathize with their frustration over things like income inequality, with CEO salaries, I think, way out of whack with in comparison to the average worker at some of the companies where those CEOs are managers. I certainly empathize with the fact that the tax system is not as fair as it could be. We've got hedge fund managers generating $10, $20, $30 million or more in annual income, but because it's mostly capital gains revenue, it's being taxed only at 15%. And so somebody making $60,000 or $70,000 a year is actually on a percentage basis paying more money than those individuals. That's just not the right way to set up your tax system. It's not fair right now. So I think people are angry at that. They're also angry at the fact that the economic malaise that we're in was caused in part by what was going on in Wall Street 3, 4, 5 years ago. And there haven't been the kinds of prosecutions or people held accountable on Wall Street for almost bringing down the entire global economy. And people want some sense of justice. And that, I think, is another part of the frustration that's fueling the Occupy Boston movement.
Have you been to Occupy Boston?
I have. I've stopped by. I've talked to some folks. I looked at the posters, and there's some neat charts about what's right with America and what people think is wrong with America. And I think it's a great movement in the sense of they're actively engaged citizens, and they're giving voice to their own thoughts and emotions and perspectives. And that's in part why I walked around the entire state, is to be the voice of the people. That's in part why I'm running for the United States Senate, because I have sensed over the course of the past several years that people feel disenfranchised with the political process, disillusioned, disconnected. They think lobbyists control too much of what the agenda is and what the priorities are down in Washington, and to some extent up at the State House. I don't take lobbyist money. I can work with lobbyists and all that, but I'm really trying to focus on giving voice to the people of Massachusetts because they do feel disillusioned. And I think that's something that's fueling the Occupy Boston and Occupy Wall Street movement as well.
President Obama is continuing to reprimand Congress.
They should be doing everything in their power to make our economy stronger, not weaker. They should be doing everything they can to protect the middle class from tax hikes, not hike your taxes.
The president wants Congress to pass the American Jobs Act, and this time he took that message to New Hampshire.
It's time for the folks who are running around spending all their time talking about what's wrong with America to spend some time rolling up their sleeves to help us rebuild America and rebuild our middle class and give young people opportunity.
Occupy members interrupted the president's speech.
No,
Wyatt Thurston supports the movement. He believes the president should hold banks accountable.
Mr. President, over 4,000 peaceful protesters have been arrested while bankers continue to destroy the American economy. You must stop the assault on our First Amendment rights.
This is the first time in 2 years that Mr. Obama has visited the Granite State. And there were voters like Joe Bramante who are still supporting him.
There's too many kids that are hungry and people not getting a paycheck that are not being looked after. The jobs bill should have been passed on the first day. That's 2 million jobs.
The president says the Jobs Act will help repair schools and roads. He says his plan will also provide tax cuts for small businesses and create jobs.
2 months ago, I sent Congress the American Jobs Act. It's a jobs bill that will put more Americans to work, put more money back into the pockets of working Americans. It's full of the kinds of ideas that in the past have been supported by Democrats and Republicans. And it's paid for by asking our wealthiest citizens to pay their fair share.
President Obama says that Congress has two clear choices: to cut taxes for the middle class or to raise taxes for nearly 160 million Americans. Reporting in Manchester, New Hampshire, I'm Colleen Shaughnessy for WEBN.
Mitt Romney rolled into Ames like a rock star. He seemed more like a celebrity than a politician at an Iowa rally.
That's quite an entrance, isn't it? Isn't that something?
Romney didn't focus on issues, but he did talk about what he called traditional American values.
It's what's made us who we are. Men and women of passion and vision who are willing to dream and take risks and live in a land of liberty.
He painted himself as the all-American candidate by sharing stories of family vacations with his parents at the national parks.
Between the stops, they would tell us about the founding of the country. Mom would read to us from a book called Men to Match My Mountains. We learned about the women and men who dreamed, who created this extraordinary country.
Romney then took the opportunity to criticize President Obama. He accused him of moving away from what he called the founder's vision for America.
The policies of our president are making us more and more like Europe, with bigger and bigger government. This is not an election just to change presidents, it's an election to save the soul of America.
The room was packed and the crowd had a lot of energy, but many people in the audience said they still did not know whom to vote for.
I'm really out here just trying to decide which candidate to choose.
I'm still undecided, but my top two candidates would be Romney and Gingrich.
Although many of the candidates said they're still undecided, it's Romney's business experience and family values that make him a top candidate.
It wasn't easy raising 5 boys, and there were times when I was so exasperated I really felt like leaving home, I think, at times. Those boys almost drove me out of the house. But Mitt would call when I was really at my wit's end and remind me that my job was more important than his.
For Channel 3 News, I'm Christina Winsky in Ames, Iowa.
Alternative energy is a hot topic here in Iowa. That's because 20% of its electricity comes from wind power. In addition, Iowa is number 2 in wind energy production. Texas is number 1. When it comes to resources, Texas Governor Rick Perry is not picking favorites.
What a great day it will be when we have allowed our oil and gas, our energy industry, in all the segments of it, whether it's the nuclear side, the coal side, the ethanol side, the wind, the solar, I don't care.
Wind turbines are manufactured here in Newton, Iowa at TPI Composites. The company conducts research, development, and manufacturing at other locations, including Rhode Island. Former Senator Rick Santorum has embraced wind and just about every other energy source.
My feeling is I have no problem with wind power. I just don't think we should be subsidizing it. I think the marketplace should work, and that goes for oil, that goes for gas, that goes for ethanol, wind, solar. We should not be picking winners and losers in the energy sector.
4 months ago, presidential candidates came here to sign a wind turbine manufactured at the TPI plant behind me. It was their pledge to advance wind as an alternative energy source.
Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann did not sign the pledge. In addition, she has promised voters here that she will shut down the Environmental Protection Agency and use oil, coal, and natural gas to their fullest potential.
We are the #1 energy resource rich nation in the world. The problem is the federal government has put our energy resources off limits. I will unlock that, legalize that, and we'll make energy one of the greatest job creators in our country.
Perry has echoed Bachmann's message to use energy to create jobs.
American-based energy is the answer to one of our big issues, and that's getting Americans to work.
Candidates Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich have also said that they embrace the GOP's all-of-the-above energy mantra. For Channel 3 News, I'm Liz Montequilla in Newton, Iowa.
The country is watching Vermont's single-payer health care system.
We're trying to model the grassroots effort that Vermont did, and in some places it's working better than others.
So I do think that Vermont's going a very different way. Doesn't mean that Vermont doesn't have some tough economic challenges, but it really is, in my sense, a model for how a state could approach some of these issues. That is not to say that Governor Shumlin's doing everything right.
Here in Iowa, the nation's Washington correspondent John Nichols moderated a progressive political panel. Jean Ross is the president of National Nurses United. She looks to Vermont as a progressive example, but worries that no other states will follow its lead.
It's essential that we get it for the country, even though you don't stop working for it state to state. But the danger of having just one state out there by itself is that they'll lose it. Everyone will come attack it before the rest of the country gets it.
The 100 people listening to the panel also had to hear Occupy caucus members frequently disrupting the speakers with their grievances.
As far as progressivism and where it's going, there's nowhere to go but up. You know, if you look at the Occupy movement, even some of those youngsters who don't know what to call themselves, they're progressive, very progressive.
It's evident from this event and others like it around the Hawkeye State that social movements are rapidly gaining momentum. For Channel 3 News, I'm Michaela Rourke reporting from Des Moines, Iowa.